discussion today will be about recovering from a cyber event, or actually the pieces we think you need to put in place to help you recover from a cyber event, right? So we'll trudge through this. This next slide really kind of asks the question, right? Is my current backup infrastructure good enough? Now, I've had this conversation with a lot of folks around the world. I have global responsibility for this for Dell Technologies. So when Michael Dell goes out and has his conversations around the world with our customers about security transformation, as you guys probably know, we are also RSA. We are also Dell SecureWorks. We are also Endpoint Security from Dell. We're all those companies all in one, and some of you may have those technologies. So we have a framework that Michael's put together on transformation for security through our company. And that framework is something he's very passionate about. When he goes and has his talks worldwide with our leaders, it tends to happen that I come in after him and we talk about how to actually build these, what we call cyber vaults that I'll take you through, okay? So the question is my current backup infrastructure good enough? And I'll submit to you, after doing this now for Dell Technologies and previously EMC, I'll submit to you that most backup infrastructures are not good enough. And the reason is the backup infrastructures that we all have, including our own when we first started this, they're vulnerable. It's been proven around the globe that they are vulnerable, right? So we can list probably 100 different attacks where the vulnerabilities were made very apparent and very painful for the companies, right? So I'll go through a couple of those. So again, the answer here is probably not. Well, how do you make it better then? So the solution we'll talk about, whether you build it with us or you build it with someone else, is the idea of having a software-driven, right, solution that allows you to create an air-gap solution to hold the most important data that the company has. The idea is, what are your crown jewels? What makes the company work? What, if you lost it entirely, would be the most important information? Now, in disaster recovery and business resiliency, we call that a lot of times level zeros, level one applications, those kinds of things, right? What are those most important applications? If I could map out what my most important applications are and put them on the other side of an air gap, meaning the bad guys can't get to them, then after any cyber event, I can get that information back. That's really what this is. So it shows a picture here of a vault. The idea is the vault is a cyber vault. That's a bank vault, but it's a cyber vault, right? So the cyber vault holds the most important information. And if you think about these companies that we'll talk about here in a moment that were brutally attacked, some of them have lost millions, if not billions of dollars because of these attacks, right? Now, from a risk management equation, there's no, how do we decide whether your company will be one of these that ends up having that kind of an attack, and there's no real way. What we've seen empirically around the world is that the numbers are kind of in the 10s to 15s from levels from management risk. So the risk equation really that we've seen says that there's less than a 10% risk that anybody will ever really get through and really cause severe damage within your corporation. Okay, fair enough. If they do get through and cause damage, what we've seen worldwide is there's at least a 7 to 9% risk that they will get to your current backup infrastructure. So what we're seeing is we're seeing them target backup infrastructures around the globe. If you think about it from a ransom type event or a data destruction type event, if they can keep you from being able to restore, that's what they're increasingly wanting to do. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. With that in mind, a 10% risk or 9% risk or whatever of them getting to those environments and destroying them and or encrypting them is fairly high. You have to make the decisions whether the control you put in place of this is worth, right, what you stand to lose from the risk perspective, right? So the solution, just real quickly, just so you can get a glance at what this really is On the left side is a production environment. You're writing to disk. The second machine from the left, you're writing to a backup appliance, right? The software writing to the backup appliance could be Veritas, it could be Commvault, it could be IBM software, it could be our software Networker or Avamar. It could be any, we don't care, it's agnostic. So writing to that disk-based backup device, it's a disk-based deduplication device. Writing to that device, software, we don't care, it's all agnostic. Now, when I say backup architectures today really are inadequate, what I mean really is, at the end of the day, today, if you look at this picture, most organizations stop right there. So when I talk to a lot of CISOs and I say, your backup infrastructure is not good enough, the next question they give me is why? And the answer is, what if it wasn't there? What if it went away? What if the bad guys destroyed it? Well, there's always disaster recovery, right? Well, I tell you this, if you're Sony or if you're Maersk or if you're Volkswagen or if you're a variety of others, they got to back up and to disaster recovery sites and destroyed everything. So if they can destroy everything, then your chances of recovery become zero. That's what we call a going out of business strategy, right? So again, it's a risk management equation we have to solve, but the control to actually make this better is pretty inexpensive compared to the actual risk for losing everything. So in this case, what we do then is we have all that important backup information on this device, this backup appliance on the left side, and we put an air gap system in between. Basically, it's a logical and a physical air gap. And I'll tell you how that works in a moment. And we connect that air gap system to a vaulted machine that is just like the one in production. The idea is to take, it's kind of a disaster recovery play, if you will. In this case, it's a cyber recovery play. So that air gap machine accepts into this vault the changed, deduplicated information on a regular basis. But it only accepts it in for a short period of time across the air gap, and then it closes the air gap to where nothing else can traverse that circuit. So that circuit coming into the vault then is highly secure, right? And I can explain how highly secure it actually is, but it's highly secure. And then the information that lands, when it lands in the vault, is entirely secure. Once it lands in the vault, meaning on that machine, which is ideally in another location, another room, another rack, what have you, once it lands on that machine, then we make it what's called immutable. So we basically create a copy of that information that can't be changed unless we have two folks with credentials in the vault at the same time. So the access control of the information inside the vault is we require two individuals with the actual necessary credentials to get inside the vault and get to the data. Now, when it's made immutable, it means it can't be destroyed, it can't be erased, it can't be changed, all those things. So on a regular basis, we copy in the important information for the company. We do the updates automatically inside the vault. We make it immutable automatically inside the vault. We basically take that golden copy, we call it, and put it on the shelf for you, so to speak, to where you can always go back to it and recover. A good question for this, two questions that I normally get asked here, and this is a larger audience, so I'll ask them for you. One is, what does the vault consist of really? First of all, within the data center, it's normally a locked room, locked cage, something that has a higher level of security around it, right? It could be protected by fingerprint scans, retina scans. We have customers around the world that use different mechanisms to protect entry into the vault. Ideally, it has one connection coming into the vault. We can give you a connection coming out under special circumstances, and I'll show you why. But in general, it's a very, very shut off from the rest of the world type event, or place, if you will. So who's doing this, right? Who's actually doing this? We've got some of our largest financial institutions in the world that are doing this. All the big companies that you know of that have had major cyber events over the last 2 to 3 years are doing this. Whenever we have a major cyber event, I'll give you some examples. TNT, FedEx, Maersk, Volkswagen. The list is as long as your arm of those companies that have had those events, and they are all building cyber vaults now because they realize that the bad guys can get to the data and destroy it, and they did it pretty easily for those companies, right? So the other areas where we see a lot of folks doing this is in the federal government, sometimes state governments. We see this in foreign governments to be able to protect information at that level. So we see it in a variety of places around the world. We even have some systems for higher education. We even have one implementation in Kansas where they're protecting student and teacher records inside of a mini vault. The idea being they were ransomed so much that they decided that it would be easier for them just to vault the important information and get it back out rather than having to worry about all the ransoms that they get. So it can scale from very large to very small to very, very large, we'll say. So inside this vault then, you have what's called a management host that runs the cyber recovery software. It controls the air gapping and the writing of the information and then making it immutable and those kinds of things. You have a recovery test host, possibly. The idea being, let's test our recoveries to make sure they actually work, right? Really good idea, right? And then you would have a backup application host. Let's say you run Commvault for your software. With Commvault, you write to the machine on the left. We bring it into the vault. We make it secure. If we have a cyber event, the vault is cut off from the rest of the world. While all chaos is breaking loose in production, which happens after a cyber event, right? Then inside the vault, you can calmly spin up a Commvault instance, and you can get ready to restore a good copy from the vault. Malware has never in 4 years ever infected our vault. Malware inside our vault can't infect our information because it can't run inside the vault. Malware requires an executable environment to run, and we don't provide for it an executable environment inside the vault. I'm storing data in a deduplicated fashion. The circuit coming into the vault is highly secured by what we call a data diode. The data diode prevents any other protocol on that circuit except for mine. It eliminates things like exposing SSH and port 123 for time and things like that across the circuit. So it's a very secure circuit coming into the vault. In 4 years around the world with hundreds and hundreds of customers, nothing has ever traversed that circuit and got into our vault. Could it ever? The answer is sure. Anything in this world is possible, as you know from a security perspective, right? Okay. So backup application hosts, say Commvault, Veritas, IBM, EMC, Dell, whatever you have. A recovery test host makes sense. We've got to test recoveries. The machine to run the software inside the vault. And then a like machine, usually quite a bit smaller than the production machine for a backup appliance. That's it. That's it. Again, a school system in Wichita, Kansas does this. And one of the biggest banks in the world does this. We talked a lot about banking today. We had Chase in earlier. One of the things that's going on with banking today is this thing called sheltered harbor. Right, some of you may have heard of sheltered harbor. Sheltered harbor is the ability for a member bank to take the information for another member bank and be able to process those transactions after a major cyber event takes down the first bank, we'll say. So they cover for each other in that case. They maintain data for each other. It's designed to keep the federal banking system alive under a severe cyber attack. That's what it's designed for. In the framework of sheltered harbor is the notion of a cyber vault that is air-gapped from the rest of the production environment. So this kind of a thing is not new, and you'll see more of it as we go through time. June 27th, 2017. Sun was shining. It was a great day. You get up and you have your first cup of coffee. You check your email. The next thing that happens is that. This is what the folks at Maersk saw June 27th, 2017. For those of you, I think everybody's probably familiar with Maersk. Maersk is a worldwide shipping company, oil company, electronics company. The list goes on, but mostly a shipping company. So 1/3 of the worldwide shipping goes through Maersk. Those big containers that they put on the ships, you'll see Maersk on the side of them often, right? So Maersk is pretty huge into the shipping business. 1/3 of the world's shipping takes place through them. In that case, Maersk suffered a knockout punch. You guys recognize these two guys, right? When I do this in Europe, they have no idea who they are. But anyway, a knockout punch. Maersk, in 8 minutes, was compromised globally. You have to think about that to get your mind wrapped around that. 8 minutes, they were compromised globally. Not a server, not a rack of servers, not a data center. All data centers. Everything was compromised. 5,000 servers. 17,000 employees couldn't work. The communication systems were down. They didn't know who to call. Imagine everything goes away in your corporate world. Who do you call? Well, if they're not on your cell phone, you don't know how to call them. It's kind of a weird thought, but true, right? How do you call them? Communications were all down. No phones, elevators, facilities, everything was down, including the coffee machines. Coffee machines ran Windows. I mean, it went down. You couldn't get coffee, for crying out loud. Think about that. That's a bad day, right? Really bad day. Now, what do they have? Their infrastructure, what they had in place to protect their information, was from my company. They had backup software, which is my backup software. They had backup disk storage, which is my backup disk storage, right? They wrote some things to tape. They had our stuff, right? They had our stuff. So, long story short, they didn't pay the ransom. Now, if you remember NotPetya, it was purely a destruction event, right? It simply was. They had a lack of a cyber recovery plan. Now, I would also tell you that I think that most companies around the world have a lack of a cyber recovery plan. When you look at NIST, left side, identify, detect, protect. Right side, respond, recover. Most of you don't spend a lot of time on the respond, recover part, and that's okay because you're with the rest of the world. I had a conversation with a CISO for a major company not too long ago, and he said, you know what, we've done everything we can for intrusion detection, protection. We're using genetic algorithms, we're using all kinds of things, behavior analytics to be able to keep the bad guys at bay. He said, but we still know something could get through, and if it does, it could be devastating. He said, we're spending all our time now on respond and recover, because we know that's where we have gaps. I'll submit to you, if you can respond and recover and get that key information back, you're in a lot better position than the rest of the world is. These guys couldn't do that. Maersk couldn't do that, right? They ordered all new hardware, for instance. Their backups really are their last line of defense. Now, at Maersk, those backup systems I just pointed out to you, those backup systems were okay. The bad guys didn't get to the backup systems. So in Hamburg, Germany, you had a good backup system. You had copies of good corporate information. Around the world, you had 120 different other sites that had good copies of information. So what's the problem? At the end of the day, they decided we have good backups we can restore, but you know what? They could not restore. Why? Everything about their network was gone. Active Directory was gone. DNS zones were all gone. Switch and router settings were all gone. Everything that told their network how to operate was gone. They had 0 copies of all of that. So, I've got these really nifty appliances that have lots of backup information on them, and I can recover them, but I can't recover because my network won't work. And I have no copies of anything. They got lucky, though, for those of you that know the story. They got lucky. They happened to have a site in Ghana that was offline for 2 days while they were attacked. That site in Ghana had replicated copies of AD, replicated copies of DNS, right? Had all the stuff they needed because it was offline for 2 days. Now, I kind of think that's the ultimate testament to an air gap, personally, because without that air gap, that natural, just bet your butt luck air gap they had, they would have been gone. They would have, I mean, think about it. They lost, as you'll see the numbers, they lost, they're encroaching on $1 billion now from this event. Imagine if they hadn't been able to rebuild everything from the copies from Ghana, what that would have really cost, right? Now, there are other companies that have suffered the same thing, and especially during the same events, right, that you'll see. So, now, after the incident, they have the same things I told you, but they also have, you look at the bottom, they also said, well, okay, we're going to build a cyber vault now. We'll have the important information in the cyber vault, which includes Active Directory, copies, DNS zone copies, all the important stuff. We're going to put it in the cyber vault on the other side of this air gap. That way, if this ever happens to us again, we can get it out of the cyber vault and we're good. That's what they're doing today. That's why I told you earlier, virtually every major company that was hit like this is doing just that, because they can't take the risk of having it happen again, right? Okay. Now, when you look at the origin of this thing, where did it come from? It came from really the Ukraine, right? It simply was a group in the Ukraine that hijacked the patch servers for Lynkos. Lynkos is accounting software, or a provider, accounting software. They hijacked those servers, and they basically distributed this thing worldwide. Now, what was it? Well, it was two vectors. It was Eternal Blue, which we know was the NSA code that was released inadvertently, right? That'll never happen again, right? No, never. Memcats, right, which we're familiar with Memcats. So those two vectors were how they got there. The other thing that we're seeing worldwide from a corporate perspective are the attack vectors are multiplying. They're coming in with multiple attack vectors. So Bank of Chile, when they basically attacked SWIFT, Bank of Chile was an attack that appeared like a ransom attack. So all the resources for Bank of Chile were brought in for the ransom attack, while the actual attack was on SWIFT, and they didn't know it. So we're seeing a lot of these multifaceted attacks happen today, right? Okay, so $10 billion in damages. Gee whiz. Maersk, you can see the look at the labels. Ever heard of these companies? Yes, most of them are in Europe. They were hit badly. TNT, you remember them? FedEx, right? FedEx is building a vault, by the way. Those kinds of things. All right. So, the impact. Well, the impact was huge. 4,000 servers, 20,000 containers. They were out of business. 300 million actually going to over $1 billion, right? That's 300 million a day. I'm going to skip this one. I used to have this slide. I'm going to get this out of all my presentations. It's like, what's latest in the news? It changes every day. I can't keep up with it for the slides, right? NIST. You've talked a lot about NIST today. I'm very much a fan of NIST, as is Dell. We are a NIST framework type company. What we do and talk to you about, we do ourselves. For instance, we have cyber vaulting within Dell Technologies, right? Those kinds of things. So what we're challenging you today to do is to look at response and recover, right? Incident response and recovery, and be able to assure yourselves that you can recover. Here's a build that kind of drives this home, if you will. On the right side is the vault. Again, it could be a rack, it could be a room, special controls in front of it. On the left side is production. I energize an Ethernet interface inside the vault. I open up a port inside the vault. Once that's open, I create a circuit that's secure going to production. Once that happens, I copy into the vault the data from production. Once that's done, I disengage the circuit. It's the best way that we know of in the world to keep your information offline most of the time, 90+% of the time, or 95% of the time. You know, it used to be we could throw everything out on a bunch of tapes. That was considered offline. It used to be we could throw it out on some disk and we can copy it to external drives and take it home and put it in our drawers. You can't do that anymore. A lot of you have too much data. It doesn't work anymore. So this is the next best thing, right? On the right side of the vault, you could have an infrastructure where you could restore the entire set of data that you lost. An example, one of the biggest banks here in the United States has 4 major security vaults. Inside their vaults, they have the ability to run the bank from inside the vault, right? So it's a new take on DR with CR. You see, disaster recovery and cyber recovery are different because cyber recovery has to be offline 99% of the time or better. Disaster recovery has to be what? Online 100% of the time for recovery, right? So we're recovering from 2 different kinds of events here. Recovering from a cyber event is very different than recovering from a disaster event, right? So in this case, I energize that, I bring the data over, and I make it immutable. Now I'm going to tell you, I won't go through the slide outside of telling you, I believe there are 2 streams of data you really should vault. One would be the important data like Maersk didn't have, we talked about. The other would be important crown jewels for the information, your SAP database, your payroll database, your accounting database. Those kinds are the most important, right? The most important apps. Here's a list of suggested rebuild materials, meaning we could just, and we do this for we're doing this for another bank here in the US where we're just vaulting critical rebuild materials, just in case the worst ever happens. You see, if I have all this stuff clean inside my vault, when you want to restore your network, I can restore your network 100 times faster than you can, because I've got clean stuff inside the vault. If you don't have clean stuff and you need to restore your network, guess what you have to do first? You got to make sure it's clean. What if it's not clean? Where'd you keep it at? In Susie's drawer or Jim's drawer somewhere that you knew it wasn't online during the attack? No. You have to make sure that it's clean. If it's inside my vault, you see it's clean. So I can bring it over and I can restore it for you. And that doesn't represent all that much information, quite frankly. Now, I show you this screen only because to show you that it's a real piece of software, it has a real GUI, and it's really kind of cool, and it has all sorts of functions, and it operates inside this cyber vault. So it is very real. It is the only software of its kind in the world to be able to recover from an attack this way. Looks kind of like that. So dashboards, assets, alerts and events, policies. I'll give you alerts under many different circumstances for what I'm seeing inside the vault, right? I automate everything I've told you through this software. Everything becomes automated. The other thing we do for you in the vault is we'll run proactive analytics. So we talked a little bit about bringing information in. We talked about making it immutable. That's all good. That way you could restore it. But we can take it to another level. We can take what we brought into the vault and we can make it immutable, not immutable, but we can cleanse it or make sure it's clean. When we make sure it's clean, we run software against it looking for indications of compromise. So from our perspective, when we store the information on disk in your production backup machine, then copy it into this vault, it's stored in a deduplicated fashion. So imagine a container that has deduplicated information in it that nobody can make sense of unless you have the map to make sense of it, right? Most of us know how deduplication works. So it's compressed and it's deduplicated. Inside the vault, we have security software that can actually analyze that compressed, deduplicated information without ever mounting anything. You see, mounting things inside the vault is a problem because it opens up an attack vector, right? So if I can analyze that information without ever mounting anything, then I don't open up that attack vector. And with that attack vector not open, I feel free to do any kind of analytics against that information that I want. So I run analytics software against the information you give me, and I'm looking at 100 different indications of compromise in the data you give me. So think about that. A lot of the analytics software that you could run in production, you can't run fully because you can't afford to run it across all your production machines because it takes too much time, takes too many cycles, it's too big out there, whatever it may be. But inside this cyber vault, you see this stuff is just sitting there. Your information is just sitting there. Why not do something with it, right? So why not make sure that it's clean and ready for you to recover? So the cyber analytics software will look for those different things in the data stream, right? It's a machine learning algorithm that we've created. So the machine learning algorithm takes that container of deduplicated data, per se, and it analyzes it looking for those indications of compromise, right? And it goes through essentially a group of steps to be able to help you decide whether you do have compromised data. So the questions we ask, right, is, the first question is, can you really do this in production? The answer usually is no. Here's an example. When I look at databases through security software, most security software, when I look at in production a database, I'm going to scan the first part of a database to look for compromise, and I'm going to go on. That's traditionally how they work. I can't look at every byte inside of a file, every file that you have in production. They simply don't work that way. So what the bad guys are doing lately is they're doing what we call slow encryption events, where they go inside an Oracle or a SQL database, and they encrypt from halfway down through the database down further. That way, security software scanning the first part of the database doesn't see that it's been encrypted. So nobody knows. Inside the vault, I'm looking at every byte inside every file or every database. I know if you've been encrypted. I know if you've been partially encrypted. I know if an encryption event is slow moving and happening in your production environment, because I'm looking at every byte inside the data I brought inside the vault. So I scan it. I run analytics against it. I do an analysis, and I repeat. Now, when we first developed this, we fed the machine learning algorithm 1,500 different scenarios. So we took the 23 major ransomware groups and basically changed them to 1,500 different scenarios to where it would understand what it was looking at, you see. So we fed it all these scenarios to make it understand. And it does a pretty good job of understanding. Now, once I do all this, I repeat, and guess what? Since I scan, I repeat, I scan, I repeat, I learn, I learn, I learn, I learn every time I scan and repeat, right? That's how machine learning works. So what are the benefits, right? I can find indication of compromise in your data inside your backup vault. I can detect inside the backup vault common things like ransomware, encryption, destruction, low corruption, those kinds of things inside the vault. I do direct indexing of the entire file systems inside the vault. There's a key to that, and that's the fact that I don't have to hydrate the information that's inside of there, you see. And if I don't have to hydrate it, nothing can really launch from there. Okay, a build, because builds kind of drive everything home, right? 1, write it to production backup. 2, send a signal to open a firewall port and an Ethernet interface. 3, bring it into the vault. And 4, replicate it into the vault, I guess. Once I get it into the vault, I disable the interface, knock it down, close the port, we're offline. I take that and I make it immutable. Once I make it immutable, I start running, I index it. Once I index it, I analyze it for compromise. Once I analyze it for compromise, I send your SOC what I've seen. Once your SOC has the information about what I've seen, then we can extract the suspected files if we found compromise. So if I find something in the file systems, I'll tell you where it is. If I find something, I'll tell you where it came from. Those kinds of things, right? This is not a replacement for what you're doing in production. This is an augmentation for what you're doing in production. This is the last line of defense. This is a guarantee that what you need to be able to restore is always restorable. Do we all need something like this? I can't answer that question for you. You have to answer that question yourself, right? Again, it becomes a risk-type equation. If the risk is real, and it's represented by the numbers I spoke of earlier, if it really is 8 to 10%, then what does that mean for the most important data? If there's a 5 to 9% chance that they'll get to your backups, what does that mean for you from a corporate perspective? So it's up to you to decide, right? So let's show you something else. We also will give you to your SOC different reports, right, on what we've seen for compromise inside the vault from the scans we've done. We'll show you the actual alert to your SOC. We will tell you what the attack vector actually was. And we will do things like this, if you can read that. Essentially what that says is we'll send you an automated email type report, and we'll make a decision on whether what we've seen is a compromise within the data. We'll send you a detailed report out to your SOC or to your NOC. The ransomware that we're looking at, right, we're looking at 100 different statistics that indicate compromise. We're measuring things like entropy. Now, entropy when we look at files and file systems or databases and database pages, entropy is a measurement of the amount of, or the lack of randomness in a data file or stream, right? We use the Shannon entropy equation to measure entropy. But we do more than that. What we do is we bring each one of those files you give us. Some of our clients are putting everything in the vault. Some of our clients are just putting the most important databases and other stuff in the vault. But the idea is, once we get it, then we take a particular file or database and we chunk it. We chunk it into, say, 16K, 128K chunks, 256K chunks, and we'll calculate hashes across all the chunks. So a file is made up of any number of chunks, if you will. Those chunks are what we submit against this list looking for compromise, right? The notion is this. I go in on a Monday and I bring everything in the vault and I look at it like this. I chunk it, I look at it, I analyze it, I look for compromise, I tell you or not, so forth. Now on Tuesday what I do the same thing on Tuesday, but I compare what I saw against on Monday, right? So if I see those changes across time in your data, then I know that I have something going on. Now, those changes I'm looking for are on this list of 100 different metrics that we look at inside the vault, right? Entropy is one of those. Similarity will be another. Some files shouldn't change. Some files change all the time. We know which ones, and we'll look at similarity inside the vault. We'll look at mass deletions. What if you have 1,000 files go away in one of your file systems one day? What does that mean? Well, what we found is that most of the time it doesn't mean anything. So, believe it or not, we won't flag that one as being a problem in the file systems for a mass deletion event. Whereas if I see a mass deletion event of 1,000 files in a file system followed by 1,000 creations in the same file system, it means somebody has deleted them on purpose, renamed them probably, and created new files. So that is an indication of a compromise. So we know that because we've vetted those algorithms or that data and we've tested it, right? So file corruption, obviously. File type mismatches, I mean, you know how ransom works. They like to change the file extensions, so we're going to be looking for that, right? And a lot more. Now, one of the things we'll do is we can tell, since we look inside of every file, we chunk everything, we can tell whether a file has inside of it what it should have inside of it or not. In other words, injection events, we can find as an indication of compromise. We're working on now a set of technologies where we can take each of these files, if you can imagine, inside the vault, and we're analyzing these files at such a level where we're looking at executables from an instruction set sequence. So we will analyze the file to make sure that the operations that are going on inside the executable are the operations that should be going on inside the executable, or whether the executable is actually malware. So in the next generation of this, toward the end of this year, we not only will just show indications of compromise, we'll also show malware if it happens to get in. If it happens to sit inside my vault, though, guys, you see, it doesn't make any difference because it can't run, right? Malware, as we know, is a piece of code that affects data, right? But it doesn't usually exist within the data. So malware doesn't sit inside your Oracle databases. It affects your Oracle databases, right? So in that sense, most of everything that goes inside my vault is, everything's fine, but the idea is if malware even came in, it's just sitting there, I don't care. I can find it, but it doesn't do any damage inside there, you see, because it can't run. So when I do these measurements for you, and I look at these 100 different things I'm looking at, then in many, many cases, 99.9% of the time, I will be able to find where you've been compromised, right? Now, ideally, quite frankly, it'd be a lot better if you found it in production before it got inside my vault. And I really think that ideally in production, you probably will with the tools that you have. But what I'm saying today is if you don't, this is another line, right? How often would you run analytics then inside the vault? That's a depends question, right? We have one firm that has 50 terabytes of information they want to run analytics on every single day, and that's okay. But it's going to require something like 24 cores and multiple analytics servers to run the analytics against that much information inside the vault. That's okay too. But the idea is it's a math problem, right? When you run these kinds of analytics against a big pot of data, it takes a lot of server, a lot of CPUs, a lot of memory to be able to do that. 5 terabytes, a lot less, 50 terabytes, 10 times more, that kind of thing. So with that in mind, this cyber software inside the vault and the analytics engine inside the vault, right, runs typically on a virtual environment. So the diagram I showed you earlier that showed the management server, the restore server, and those things is typically a virtual environment inside a rack of servers, if you will. Nothing that earth-shattering or dramatic, right? Now, when I actually find something, an attack vector will say, I'll point it out to you here if you can read that. I'll point out what the attack vector was, and then I'll give you a description of what we actually saw. Well, once again, there's really 23 different major types of ransomware families, if you will. You know what they do, right, is there's not a whole lot of inventiveness going on out there. They're taking Eternal Blue, and they're taking SamSam, and they're taking other things, and basically they're, changing it. They test it, they change it, they test it, they change it. They add something here, they add something there, but there's not a whole lot of new things, which is why you don't see a lot of zero-day things and a whole ton of APTs and those kinds of things. They're spending their time doing other stuff, which is okay. But the idea is, will it always be that way? And the answer is probably not. When they see opportunity, they will take the opportunity to make as much money as possible, right? So these 23 will grow, but within these 23, we've measured and tested and understand how they act. And we understand what their actions create inside our data streams. And we understand by looking at your data whether they've been there or not. That's what we actually give you. Now, the next thing that we actually give you, oh, no, not that one. The next thing we actually give you, and it's not here, I apologize, I don't have the slide, but the next thing I actually give you is an IP address of where it came from. I'll give you a share for where it came from. If you allow me to have access to your event logs, I'll tell you the user it actually came from, right? So we can trace it back to its origin, as well as knowing what it did and where it exists. Now, another thing we also do is if I'm indexing every piece of data in what you've given me from your production systems, then I also have the ability, which is really pretty nifty, I have the ability to take that information and restore it directly from the cyber analytics software. So let's say you back things up with Veritas, and you put it inside the vault, and it's all secure. It's all good. We analyze it. We find compromise. We decide we need to restore stuff. You don't have to go back through Veritas to restore it, you see. You can restore it directly from the cyber analytics software because I give you a browsable catalog and I'll let you choose exactly what to restore and point it right back to production and restore it. That's pretty powerful. It also saves a lot of time when you think about it. It takes time to pass data through a backup media server and then back out into production. If I can restore it directly from the Vault data store directly back to production, it takes a lot less time. So I can take the data, I can secure the data for you in the Vault. The software that runs against it makes sure it's clean. And then at the end of the day, we can allow you to restore the information back out. Now, we'll tell you also, we'll say, well, you had a Commvault backup or a Veritas backup done, yesterday at 12 o'clock, and that one's clean. Because we looked at yesterday's at 12 o'clock, and we compared that against today's, so we know what's clean and what's not. So we'll tell you what to restore, we'll give you the ability to restore it, and we'll guarantee what you're restoring is clean. Now, I submit to you at the end here that something will always slip through. As everybody today has told you, something has the propensity to slip through. And if it does, it can cause varying degrees of damage. If you're Maersk, it could almost destroy the entire company. If you're Nuance Software, it can almost destroy the entire company, right? There's a lot of different players that have fallen into that, right? And it's just very real. At the end of the day, then, this becomes a tertiary copy of key information, stored in a way that the bad guys can't get to it. That simply makes a lot of sense to me. It really does. Now, it costs a few dollars, of course. You have to buy the backup appliance. You have to install the software, but trust me, it's not heavy lifting. And at the end of the day, you can always restore the information. Now, what we've found is that for those companies I've listed, that at the end of the day, they've decided that the risk is too great for them, that they must have something like this. We think that there's a paradigm shift happening in IT around the world, to where IT is now more so in traditional infrastructure services folks, which I was part of, one of them for years. Those folks are becoming more acquainted with the security folks. Traditional DR is changing to encompass cyber recovery. This is a shift in how we've always done this. We didn't need cyber recovery type things, 10 years ago. It just didn't happen. We didn't need it. Disaster recovery is all we need. I'll leave you with this thought and we'll take some questions. One, what do you think, just think about this, what do you think is more likely? Is it a disaster recovery event, and now posing this question in New Orleans is kind of like when I posed it in Houston about a year ago. It's like, I don't know what the results will be. But anyway, what do you think in general is more likely in your organization? Is it a disaster type event? Floods, you guys are acquainted with those. Tornadoes, the traditional disaster, right? Or is it a cyber event that could be more likely? I will tell you that in general, when asked around the globe, the answer is about 97% a cyber event rather than a disaster type event. Now, a lot of us has been involved in disaster recovery for a number of decades. Now, we've gotten better at it, and we've gotten better at it and better at it, but we've thrown money at it every year to make ourselves better, which is good. But what we just all decided, I think, today is that there's less likelihood that we have that kind of an event happen than a cyber event. Okay, so the next question is this. Going forward with that in mind, consider how much money that you spend in your organization on cyber recovery events. Not disaster recovery events, cyber recovery events. And just think about that for a moment. I've asked that question a number of times around the globe, and the answer is, that's a good question. It's a different paradigm, isn't it? It's fair. It's a fair question, right? To be able to ponder. I think it is. And I think at the end of the day, none of us want to end up being like one of those companies that had everything destroyed. Now, what we've seen when we've worked with folks globally is that once this kind of a notion is taken forward through the IT organization and possibly the security organization, I sat last week with 12 people from Royal Bank of Scotland, from the CISO all the way through his entire staff. And at the end of that conversation, the Royal Bank of Scotland said, we are going to do something like this because of risk, right? What I'm telling you is at the end of the day, when folks are educated within your organization, and when it gets to the highest level within the organization, as you know, they have fiduciary responsibility to protect the information of the company. With that in mind, most of them, as Michael Dell will tell you, most of them that he's talked to, when they understand the gravity and when they understand the simplicity of the control or the solution, are opting to do something like this. Now, you don't have to do it my way. You can do it your way. You can build your own thing just like I've described it. I mean, it simply works, right? You can get your own analytics software, you can produce your own air gap, you can open and close your own ports, you can do all that yourself, which is fine. But this software is already done and developed and works and is in a shrink wrap box and has a scary face on the front of it and all that kind of stuff, so you could get it from us too. So totally up to you. But I think you should consider it. I really do. Now, based upon that, I'm at the end of my time. We'll take a few questions and we'll go, because I know you're tired. Questions?
Does your solution actually have the ability to interact with something like AMP or Symantec, to where it's actually a full package? Because the remediation that you're talking about is just the data. We're also looking at the endpoint that actually caused the issue. Do you have any type of interaction like that that actually allows those solutions to help remediate on the endpoint end?
Two things. To answer your question directly, yes and no. You love that, don't you? It depends. If you're RSA, yes, because they're part of our company, right? So we'll talk to RSA. Dell SecureWorks, yes. Going forward, others like Cisco, AMP, and others, yes, but not today. Roadmap, yes. One of the things I want other technologies on the front end to give me, the thing that RSA has to give me and Cisco has to give me, is that if they're seeing compromise in production, I need to know. The vault needs to know, because we don't want to do any open of air gaps or close. We want to keep everything shut off. So at a minimum, yes, we're working with all the folks you just mentioned to do that. Now, as it evolves with Cisco and others, how far will we go? I can't tell you, because it's simply roadmap toward the end of this year. Okay.